the webinar series Talking Medical Data with Briya. My name is Daniela Traub, Marketing Manager at Briya. We all create an abundance of data, whether we like it or not. An astounding 30% of all data stored globally belongs to the healthcare and life science industry. This data can save lives, accelerate drug development, improve medical outcomes, and enable groundbreaking research. But all this is only possible granted we have the tools to share this data effectively amongst all relevant stakeholders. In our discussion, we will try to understand what is being done with this enormous amount of data, what are the challenges and possibilities, as well as the potential, and how we may bridge the gap. I would like to introduce our esteemed panel participants, Mr. Moshe Bar-Siman-Tov, who held various senior government positions over the past 2 decades, most well known as the former Director General of the Ministry of Health in Israel between 2015 and 2020, Dr. Fabio Lievano, physician, surgeon, epidemiologist, and Vice President of the Safety Society Medical Safety Evaluation, Pharmacovigilance, and Patient Safety at AbbVie. He is also an affiliate professor at Loyola University Chicago, Street School of Medicine, and Dr. Gadi Lalazar, Director of Hepatology in Shaare Zedek Medical Center and Chief Medical Officer at Briya. He's a Rockefeller Clinical Scholar and affiliate with New York Presbyterian Hospital, Columbia, and Cornell. Thank you for joining us today. I would like to dive straight into the core of this discussion, the data. So when looking at data in the world, in the healthcare system, it seems that we're decades behind. Can you please tell me, what are the reasons for that? I think we'll start with Dr. Lievano.
I think, and I appreciate the question, for those who, like us, have been working in the space, we feel frustrated how it is possible to know everything about your personal life in regard to your financial information at a moment's notice, but it's very difficult to access your own healthcare information. That's what I'm saying. It's very frustrating because one day we will become patients. I think there are many factors for what you just asked. I think everybody will say there's a lot of regulations for the data transmission of data, especially if international transmission of data is complicated. It's not as easy as you think. There are a lot of laws, HIPAA compliance, and HIPAA basically is a set of regulations that guarantee that the patient information here in the US is safeguarded. Then perhaps that combined with the lack of standardization, there is no standardization about what is the kind of data that has to be collected. Also combined with the number of companies now that are proliferating in the space, some of them without expertise. In addition to the large amount of information, well, when you talk about what is data, data is huge, and nobody knows exactly what kind of data you want. There is no standardization, as I said before, and perhaps some providers in hospitals are afraid of this kind of a nightmare situation in which they give information, but the data is not secure. Then I think that to improve that, we have to demonstrate the value of collaboration, the value of sharing data in a safe way, of course, for the patients, in a very encrypted and very safe way for the data to make sure the data is sent to different parts, to preserve the quality of the data, because, well, if you do a mistake with 1% of the patients, imagine the implications that might have for whatever study you are doing. If I'm doing a safety study to demonstrate, for example, the difference between 2 medicines, and I find that one has a risk of cardiovascular condition that is probably higher to what is expected in the population, I will get very concerned. But imagine if that is because of a result of the poor quality of the data that was used for that study. Then the perils of not having good quality data is also incredibly high. Then all these considerations have to be taken into account when we think about these collaborations for data sharing about healthcare systems.
Thank you so much. Mr. Bar-Siman-Tov, what is your opinion on the matter?
Well, I think we all know that everything in healthcare is complicated. It goes far beyond just the privacy issues that are critical in order to use the medical data, but also the biology, the human body, is complicated as well. But again, I think that there is a systematic complexity when it comes to health. There is a quote of former President Trump that he was trying to shape a new plan program after the Obamacare, and after a few weeks people asked him, what is your new plan? And he said nobody knew healthcare could be so complicated. So healthcare is indeed complicated, and when we are touching human lives, we must be cautious as possible. And of course, when the privacy issues are in the matter as well, we must be cautious as well. And I think that it's different than in any other industry.
How is it different?
Well, our ability to make mistakes is much more limited when we are touching human lives. I mean, we all know that the first thing that we don't want to do is to do no harm when we are talking about medicine or treating people. So the ability to make mistakes is much more limited. This is why the process of approving new therapeutics is so long, because we don't really understand all the mechanism within the human body and within human health. And again, we don't want to make no harm and make no damage to the health of the people.
Okay, Dr. Lalazar, how would you approach this?
So I think these are all critical issues: the complexity, definitely the privacy and security, and also the different layers of regulation. So this is a highly regulated area, as was mentioned. I think just to add to that, I'd add the extra layer of the difficulty harmonizing data, where we have different players all trying to improve human health that are collecting and creating data in separate silos. And to gather meaningful data, we have to be able to aggregate and harmonize that data. So that is another layer of complexity that is very apparent in healthcare data.
Thank you. So we spoke about the problem, but how is the industry currently trying to take care of this specific problem? What are the solutions that are offered in the market today?
Well, I think first we must understand how crucial it is to use this data, and I think that the pandemic gave us a few lessons about it, because we can demonstrate now that by using data, by aggregating data from different resources, not just from the healthcare system, we can save lives. So the first step is, again, to understand it in the national level, not just as an issue within the healthcare system, because it takes national resources and national effort as well. And again, I think that when we are talking about harmonizing data, is again creating these different layers of data, making them be available for entrepreneurs, for researchers as well, and creating the infrastructures for them to utilize this data again for the purpose of developing new therapeutics or designing new healthcare services as well.
Okay, Dr. Lievano.
I think the way we are handling this today is a little bit, we are relying on external organizations to conduct the studies. We are basically sometimes duplicating the studies, then because there is no kind of a good source of information. Then when you get a set of patients, then you try to do your study in that set of patients, but that database may have some channeling bias or some sort of bias that may be different when you conduct the study in another database. Then duplication is a big problem, and when you duplicate and get different results, now you don't know what is true. You have two different results, different confidence intervals, perhaps they don't overlap, then that results in big complications. I think the regulators, perhaps, they have, of course, to impose a lot of set of rules. We can work perhaps together with them, develops case examples and studies that demonstrate that data sharing and collaboration is best for healthcare systems. I think there is a big impact of the transmission of information from patients today. Let's imagine if there is a hacker to get access to patient information and use it for something that is really bad. Put it out there in the web, displaying healthcare data from patients or things like that. Then there is a lot of risk the way we are conducting these studies today because we are handling this data in a very casual way. You send big databases sometimes through like a cloud. It is said that about 80% of the data is sent via the cloud. That is not really secure. Then at this moment we are doing it, but let's say we are duplicating and in a not very safe and perhaps not good for safeguarding the information of the patient.
Interesting you touched regulation. We'll come back to that shortly. First, I would like to hear Dr. Lalazar's comments on this question.
This need is what drives us to search for new treatments, new medicines, something that is fraught with also danger, because we're trying new things, and as Moshe said, it's really something that is entailed with some risk, and you have to be very careful. So that's an important thing to realize, is that need is moving us forward, and this need now, we realize that in order to reach the next level of medical breakthroughs, we now have to have data on a large scale to further improve human health, to find patients with rare disease, and to reach meaningful conclusions. We have to aggregate data, we have to reach larger and larger populations, we have to include those that aren't included. So this need is what's driving us to loosen, in a sense, our natural tendency to not share data, and forcing us to find innovative ways to share this data so that we can reach this next level of breakthrough.
Dr. Lievano touched upon the regulation. So how does regulation impact data sharing, and is it also different between different regions?
I know that it is different, and regulation is crucial in this matter, because we need to create a framework both for the health organizations and for the industry and entrepreneurs and researchers as well, that the regulatory framework is going to be stable. This is what we tried to do in Israel, to say this is the rules that you have to follow in order to use the data for secondary use, because for the initial use for treatment, it's relatively clear, but for the secondary use, where the utility of using the data is not that clear for the specific patient, it's a different set of considerations. So regulation do plays a crucial part, and I think that, again, there is no set of global rules yet, and I hope that the world will get there. But I think that it is also an advantage for small countries like Israel that are not depends on other set of countries, set of parliaments like the EU or the United States, to go forward and to go fast.
Is it different between Israel, the US, and Europe, and in which way?
Well, I think we know that the data in Israel is different because the data is diverse and integrated and longitudinal as well. And it gives us, I think, maybe the sense of urgency that we have something that we can use, and we should use it faster before other countries will catch up. And I think that it forced us to set the regulation relatively a flexible one. And since we have a relatively concentrated healthcare system, we got 4 HMOs. 2 of them are accounting for 80% of the population in Israel, and they are all vertically integrated. Not all of them, but some of them are vertically integrated as well. So they own the clinics and they own the hospitals as well. So they own a relatively large portion of data. So we know that we can count, and we know that we can regulate effectively the healthcare organizations in Israel, and we can trust them when we are trying to set new regulation that they will not try to breach the regulation and so on.
Great, thank you so much. Dr. Lievano, can you tell me your perspective on this and maybe from your region?
Yes, and I was 2 days ago in Barcelona where the MedTech Forum was really talking about this. I learned that in March of this year, 2022, the Department of Commerce here in the United States issued a new set of parameters. It's called the Shield Privacy Act. And this is about sharing international data between Europe and the US. It is the conception that in the US there is the privacy rules sometimes are a little bit too relaxed, and in Europe a little bit more stringent. Then with this new kind of rules that the Department of Commerce just issued, they expect that those who transfer data between countries get some sort of minimum parameters about what should be and what are the parameters of sending this transmission of data. And that's a good progress, because that means the governments from US and different countries in Europe are starting to think that we need to have more data that is more global. At the end of the day, the importance of data is all about the power of the data. It's all about statistical error. The larger the database, the more diverse, the more inclusion of female and males ratios, young and elderly populations, is what gives veracity to the results that we get. Then if we want to do an analysis of any sort of information at the scientific level, we know that we want a large data set that is very complete. One of the big problems in the US is the silo of the healthcare data. Some data is in registries, some data is in electronic medical records, some data is in claims, and these data don't talk to each other. These data are completely separate. That means for one person, you may have the same person in different databases and they don't communicate to each other. That means the data may be repeated, the data may be wrong, and we only have a partial picture of what is happening in the life of the patient. We don't have the longitudinal data as described before. That's important to do medical assessments.
Thank you. Dr. Lalazar?
I think clearly regulation is different in different countries. And it stems from, perhaps in part, from a cultural difference in our perception of what is private and what isn't. So that also differs among countries, and I think the United States is a clear example of a difference compared to Israel, where privacy means different things. I think it's very important to, while you're trying to innovate, to respect those differences. And I think that if you can identify the value that you can bring to a society, what their needs are, then that could be your entry point, and you can bring value to them while respecting their cultural and regulatory differences and bringing innovation to them, but according to their flavor.
Is it that easy, let's say in countries like Germany, where the privacy is top of everything?
I think that certain countries are definitely finding it hard to move forward in this space and are having to create specialized projects to enable data sharing within their very restrictive regulatory framework. And that's an example for in a country where, for example, the EU is what might help them. Yep. Because the EU regulatory framework, is less restrictive than the German one. So it might, in the future, overrule it in a sense, or make it possible for people within Germany to innovate in this space despite the German regulation, or perhaps help that regulation evolve towards a European standard.
Okay, let's move from security to data quality, or maybe a step before that. What is the fine balance between the need for security and privacy and the data quality? What would be the trade-off between de-identification and data quality?
I think that we cannot compromise privacy. But again, there is no risk that we can mitigate in an absolute way. But we shouldn't, the message to the public shouldn't be we are compromising your privacy because there are some other benefits to the all goods. We must make sure that the public know, and we know, that we are doing everything needed in order to ensure that the privacy is being kept. But again, when we are talking about risk mitigation, so there are some certain rules and certain methods that we should take of de-identification, etc., that you mentioned before. And I think that again, once we are doing it, we should be sure that we did what we need to do, because again, on the other end, it could be endless.
Dr. Lievano.
Thank you. Encrypted data should be of high quality. But the problem of high-level encryption is at the same time you cannot use this data too much. When you use data, you should be able to de-encrypt very quickly, and that sometimes may be difficult. I know that software companies are facing the challenge of having to develop software systems that are 99.9 reliable. Otherwise, it might result in misinterpretation of the data. I think the investments should be done in data curation to make sure that the data that we analyze is really proper and there are no errors. But again, talking about, it has to be a delicate balance between high quality information and preservation of the encryption of that information. In some hospitals, believe it or not, perhaps here in the US and other parts of the world, people can arrive with their own their own computer or laptop or iPad and download some information from patients very casually. It's so much that it's called bring your own device. You get to the hospital, get the data, and casually bring it home for analysis. That should be stopped because these are private information. And perhaps because the systems are old, well, people allow that to happen. Then, again, going back to security has to be the best for this encryption and transmission of data. But at the same time, we are trading off the high quality of information that we require to make a certain analysis and the power that we require to make sure that that result basically confirms what we are hypothesizing.
Thank you. Dr. Lalazar, what is your opinion?
I think that privacy and compliance is of the utmost importance, and that's the framework we operate in. But within that framework, if you want to gravitate, say, towards absolute security, then you're going towards synthetic data, which has very clear limitations on its use. On the other hand, if you have a system where you can automatically de-identify, and then if you're able to create longitudinal records from completely de-identified sources, and you also avoid the added risk of having to transfer the data to another location to then harmonize, de-identify it, match it, etc., you're striking, I think, a good balance in the sense of bringing maximal security while not compromising data quality. So I think it is possible given the right set of tools. I think one of the critical things is not moving data out of the data owner until it actually goes to where it's going to be.
A decentralized
So
system.
thank you. So a decentralized system would be a very good approach to this problem of cloud security, etc. I also think that de-identification is a basket term. And if you are de-identifying partially so that you can then match data, then there is a security risk there. If you're able to de-identify completely, but yet match data in an effective way, then you're again avoiding this added layer of risk.
Thank you. You mentioned longitudinal data and records. Dr. Lievano, is it something that's important, and if so, why?
Thank you, Daniela. Yes. When I am an epidemiologist from the CDC, and one of the biggest problems when we were conducting epidemiological studies was that the claims databases, or sometimes the electronic health record that we use it for the study, were just looking at a patient for the last 5, maybe 10 years, mostly 5 years. And if we were looking at a specific condition that has developed, for example, cardiovascular, cancer, or others, we don't have the background to say, for example, this patient has been displaying these symptoms for the last decade or more, or this patient was exposed to cigarettes for a long period, or this patient lived in an area that has perhaps some water that is contaminated. We didn't have that luxury. Then we come to a result and we basically do an assessment and perhaps assign this disease or this complication to something that may not be there. Having longitudinal data, it is important, it's essential to connect the dots. Let's remember, we are treating patients, and patients have a long life, and we need to see all the variables that have contributed to certain conditions, not the last that just occurred in the few months or years before the incident. Then longitudinal data, it is essential to make sure we discard all the variables to assign a condition to a person. Also for treating patients, if a medicine didn't work 10 years ago, why we are going to use it again 10 years later? It will save on resources and utilization of medical services.
Mr. Bar-Siman-Tov, what is your opinion on the matter?
We used to think that, again, we need to find ways to de-identify the data so well so we could bring it to one area, to one data lake. And now we know that it's not just a privacy issue, it's also an ownership issue of the health organizations, at least in Israel, but I guess that elsewhere as well, because the organization don't want to give their data so easily and so quickly, and they put on so many barriers. And again, when you bring on the privacy issues, it's also almost become impossible. So I think that developing the ability to work in a decentralized system where each organization keeps the data inside the organization, I think it's a great leap forward.
Okay, Dr. Lalazar?
I think that longitudinal patient records are critical because they give us the full patient story. They also allow us to count patients correctly. We're not counting a patient once or twice. We're not counting them more times than they exist. So obviously this is critical to get the correct data. I also think that within that, patient level data is critical.
Yep.
For some of the secondary uses of data. For example, if we would like to use this data for real-world evidence studies for regulatory purposes, we have to be able to, despite the de-identification, we have to be able to drill back down to the individual patient data level, and that's an FDA requirement. So I think longitudinal data gives us the most accurate data, and the ability to de-identify but yet drill back down to the single patient level gives us the most uses of the data, including for regulatory approval purposes.
Okay, so we've been speaking about things that a solution must have. So what in your eyes would be the ultimate data exchange solution for the healthcare and the research and the development?
Well, I think that the ability to utilize data from different resources and not just of healthcare organizations. I think that we know that the social determinants of health are crucial in order to understand the mechanism of how diseases develop over the course of time. So if we could use for this purpose some social parameters as well, and again to use as many different and diverse types of data from different resources, and again to harmonize them. And again, the longitudinal issue is also crucial if we want to understand how diseases develop over the course of time, and to identify the markers. We must use longitudinal data, but again, as much data as possible, genomic, social data, medical record, where people live and to the type of pollution that they are exposed to, which schools they are going, etc. Any type of data can contribute. So if we have a system that could operate in using all these types of data, I think that this is what we should aim to.
Sounds amazing. Dr. Lievano, what is your ultimate solution?
I would say that allowed international transfer of data to try to put the real world evidence together and the longitudinal data together. But it has to be following in the US HIPAA compliant. That means privacy, security, and breach of information has to be followed. There has to be some self-certification of annual compliance. There has to be some commitment to privacy to not obstruct the data flows of the future. There has to be with a predictive value positive, I would say above 99.5%, to have a high level of encryption and to be internationally accepted. That's why I said this is kind of a wish list of what will be the data parameters to the parameters to transmission of data in the future.
Thank you. Dr. Lalazar?
So just to add to that, my ultimate solution would have a rapid integration time. It would allow me to integrate to a diverse set of resources, diverse healthcare systems, or other types of information that's either healthcare data or relevant to healthcare. It would be able to harmonize data, but not only in the sense of being able to translate data into a common format, but being able to make as much of the data standardized, even if it wasn't originally standardized. So natural language solutions, etc., so that we can fill in the blanks. It would then touch on the other topics that we talked about. It would be able to transmit this data in a secure fashion and allow for its use for a diverse types of secondary uses. I would also add to that the fact that we would want it to to do the least to the data. We would alter the data the least amount possible, starting by leaving it where it is, therefore making it actually the most up-to-date data. The moment you remove data from a source, it by definition is no longer being updated. So if we could do inquiry time searches, where we could only take out the data when we need it, and it's being updated to that very moment, then that would sort of be the ideal situation.
You touched upon languages. What kind of languages were you referring to?
So for example, these would be different formats. I'm differentiating between data harmonization at the technological level, meaning different computer languages, formats for storing and creating healthcare data, differentiating that from harmonization, being able to draw out all the different pieces of the healthcare data puzzle from wherever they are stored, be it in physician notes or in fields that are already populated within structured data in a healthcare record.
So each one of you comes from a different field of expertise. How can such a solution benefit your field? Dr. Lievano.
Well, let's imagine in the field of drug development, we can conduct, for example, synthetic trials because we will have data from a lot of patients to be able to compare in the field of oncology. We will have also in pharmacovigilance, we'll be able to do longitudinal studies that really represent the population. We can also, perhaps patient advocacy groups would like to partner with us, and then we get more information from patients. At the same time, imagine a world in which patients like us will have access to our own information. All these connected, maybe some artificial intelligence can be developed to identify signals of safety and efficacy and benefit risk for the medicines that exist out there. It will be faster to do signal evaluation and identification, better clinical outcomes for patients because there will be less waste time in resources in medicines that work or do not work, and better data governance. At the same time, perhaps we can connect genomics and other information that is beneficial for patients. Then will this occur in the near future? I think it will. There is right now the capabilities and there is a lot of software being developed that will guarantee that we have access to this kind of information for the good of patients. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Lalazar?
So, as a physician scientist, access to wider data sets would enable me to broaden my reach to wider populations and to affect questions and problems that I couldn't touch before. Access to real-world data means that I can collect data that's already out there without having to put in the resources and put patients at risk for a question that might have already been answered. So I think with the correct system in place, it gives us tremendous power to improve human health at a fraction of the cost and at a fraction of the risk.
Thank you. To summarize this discussion, what would your opinion be?
I think that, well, from my perspective, maybe a national healthcare system perspective, when we look ahead, we know that we cannot satisfy the demand for health services in the next decade while operating the system the way that we do it today. The demands is going to be so huge. And we need to find some new ways to deliver healthcare services. And I think that, again, the key for that is data. So there is the bedside level that is crucial to take the right decision to the specific patient, but there is also the aggregated or the national level. And again, it's to develop some new tools to deliver services, but also to manage the system. We can manage it much better while using data. And again, I think that the pandemic taught us that the potential is huge, and we really got nothing to be afraid of using this data. We can do it properly.
This is a lovely note to finish at. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's hope that this amazing solution will come to life and is out there in order for us to save lives. For more webinars about this fascinating topic of data sharing, please enter briya.com and subscribe to our social channels. Thank you very much.